Hi, everyone. Might just leave it another few seconds before we get started. You're very welcome in. Okay, so we may kick off. Good afternoon. You are very welcome to this webinar today dedicated to establishing a presence in the United States. My name is Clive Donnelly and I am a Trade Development Executive with Enterprise Ireland, based in our Boston office with responsibility for industrial manufacturing. I worked with Enterprise Ireland for 3 years, starting out in Brussels and transferring across to the US a year ago. I've learned a lot in the last year about the differences between the US and Europe for establishing a presence. And we decided to host this event today to hopefully provide you with some helpful tips and insights from partners and client companies and ourselves on forming a US presence and what is involved and how to overcome some of those complexities. So we've kept it purposely broad. We have a really great panel of client companies here across the industrial portfolio, and the audience as well is mixed. So it's clients from across the broader industrial portfolio and agribusiness. It's packed agenda, and a quick overview is available here on the screen. We are honoured to begin with a special welcome message from Geraldine Byrne-Nason, the Ambassador of Ireland to the United States. Unfortunately, the Ambassador could not join today in person, but she's recorded a special message to welcome you. Following that, there will be a presentation from HSP Group, a US-based market expansion partner that we work with here, followed by some great insights by Enterprise Ireland client companies, WiseTech, McGrowTech, and Bevcraft Group. So we will close out with an overview of the supports our overseas teams can offer you, and a message from Tom Kelly, the Divisional Manager of Life Sciences and Industrial at Enterprise Ireland. Just to note that the session will be recorded and the slides will be shared following the event. And please feel free to pop your questions into the chat throughout. We want to keep it as as open as possible. So without further ado, please enjoy this special message from Ambassador Byrne-Nason.
Hello everyone, it's a great pleasure for me to speak with you today and to thank Enterprise Ireland for inviting me to be at the opening of your event. I regret that I'm going to be in San Francisco on business on the date of the event, so I'm delighted that they gave me the opportunity to pre-record my remarks here today. I've been looking at the running order for today's event, and I expect that you're going to have a really enlightening discussion on Irish companies entering and scaling in the US market. And I also hope that you're going to find time to consider how Irish innovation can help shape the actual future of the industrial and agribusiness sectors. I'd like to pay a warm welcome to the 3 Enterprise Ireland client companies who are going to discuss their experiences of establishing businesses in the US through each of their respective strategies as they did that. And I want also to give a warm welcome to our guest speakers from the HSP Group and thank them for joining the event today. I know that they will shed light on some of the key pillars for success in entering this very important US market. And of course, there are increasing challenges in the market of inflation, labour shortages and impacted supply chains. But the reality is the United States remains ripe with opportunity for Enterprise Ireland's industrial and agribusiness client companies. Joining us today are 3 examples of high-performing companies from the industrial sector. It's exciting to have such a wealth of experience in the same virtual room, and we want to thank them for being here today, sharing their experiences of entering and scaling the US markets. For Irish companies, the United States has always been, remains a key market. According to official results this year that were released this year, exports to North America from Enterprise Ireland companies increased by 13%. That's reaching $5.5 billion in North America, now accounting for 17% of all exports by Enterprise Ireland-backed companies. Very significant numbers. There are also over 900 Enterprise Ireland client companies currently operating here in the US. 100,000 people are employed by Irish-owned companies. This is hugely significant, and Irish companies across industrial, manufacturing and engineering sectors continue to make great strides in the United States. The flexible and open approach of Irish companies is, I believe, unique. It certainly is recognised internationally. I believe that Ireland itself has solidified on the global stage as being a competitive and leading partner. We as Ireland, the Irish government, remain committed in our support of Irish organisations. As we've emerged from the pandemic, we're now readying ourselves for this new world. On behalf of the Irish government as Ambassador to the United States, I want to wish all attendees every success today, and of course not just now setting out on your US journey, but as some of you continue on that important journey in the United States. I'm confident that you will continue to bring your Irish advantage across the great Atlantic pond. Thank you.
Thank you. As put by the Ambassador, the US is an extremely important market for Irish companies, but also comes with challenges, especially at the minute with increased costs, with inflation, supply chain challenges, and of course the war on talent. The sheer size alone can be extremely intimidating, especially at the beginning. And one of the ways that we can support is by connecting you with local service providers who can help to overcome some of these complexities. And I'm delighted today to introduce Sally So and Ryder from the HSP Group. HSP is a global expansion group that supports companies to successfully enter new markets, and they are very well placed to advise today. Sally has spent her entire career in the global expansion services industry, helping clients ranging from very small startups to large Fortune 500 companies with anything from their tax, accounting, HR, payroll, mergers and acquisitions, and legal challenges. And Ryder works in HSP's partnership team and specializes in helping companies to navigate some of the most common challenges when setting up in the US, and to help prevent prolonged and very costly pitfalls. So I'll hand over now to Sally. As I said, there will be a Q&A at the end, so please pop your questions in the chat and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Sally, for the introduction. So as I've mentioned, Sally So, based out of our Boston office here at HSP. So if I move on, a quick overview of our agenda here. We essentially go through the A to Z of coming into the US. So we'll essentially start with understanding, first of all, how do we even set up an entity in the US? What are some of the considerations, pros, cons of each types? Then we'll go into sort of site selection, and then we'll go into more of the, I would say, hot topics of the accounting and tax considerations, payroll and employment considerations, before we wrap it up at the end here. Yeah. Okay. So starting off with entity type, I think is probably the most common questions from all of my clients. We first like to understand, in order to operate a business here, of course, you need to have an entity. Usually in, I think, some of the other markets in EMEA, there is a concept of what's called a payroll only, or we call it non-resident employer. No such thing in the US, right? If you want to hire employees, start making sales, we highly recommend that you register some sort of entity type in the US. So there are different types. There's a branch office that is not seen as a separate legal entity from your own parent, right? So it's seen as an extension of the Irish parent. Pros and cons of that is, I would say from a complexity perspective in the US, it's fairly similar to a full-on incorporation of a full-blown separate entity. And it doesn't offer you that separate legal liability separation. So I would say 99% of the time, unless there's really some overarching operations or tax benefit from opening a branch, I would default to what we call a subsidiary. So a subsidiary is, as I mentioned here, it's a distinct separate legal entity. And that essentially will protect your parent, whether it's in Ireland or some other jurisdiction, from any, liability issues that arise from your US operations, right? So then from a subsidiary perspective, there's different types. I listed here the two most common, which are a limited liability company, which is an LLC for short, or a C corporation. That's probably more popular, a taxable corporation. There are other types, so S corporations, so proprietorships, but we find with companies coming overseas, unless it really is small operations, like one or two owners, these two items here, LLC and C corp, are going to be the most popular. And really the big difference between the two is, I would say top considerations is, does the company intend to go public? Yes or no, right? LLC, you will not be able to go IPO. C corp will give you that flexibility. Usually LLCs are more flexible in terms of management. The reason why is there is no requirement to have a board of director. You can essentially have a team of managers, CEO, CFO, etc. And that's that. Whereas with the C corp, you do need to assign the full board of directors that will have oversight over the management office, right? I think the third item that really sticks out between the two is the tax, right? So with the C corporation, we often find that there could be what we call double taxation, especially if you are a shareholder of the company. You will get taxed once on a corporate level, so the standard, 22%, but then once dividends are issued, then you get taxed again if you're a shareholder on those dividends, right? Whereas on the LLC, you could structure in a way where you can either be taxed solely, or there is definitely a potential of double taxation, but I think there is more protection on the tax side of things. So I was saying those are really the three big differentiators between LLC and C corporation. And I will move on. Yeah. Then the next steps is, once we identify what type of entity do you want to set up, is where do you want to incorporate, right? I think everyone can go on Google and understand that Delaware is usually the hot spot for where companies incorporate. I'd say 90% of my clients do choose to incorporate in Delaware. Very, very simple. It can be, a click of a button, done within 24 hours. I would like to advise folks that they take a step back and really understand what are your operations, right? So when you register to do business in Delaware, let's just say you have your operations in Wisconsin or Ohio or Illinois, which are really the big hubs for the industrial and agricultural businesses, you then have to have a subsequent registration to do business in that state. So I don't always advise clients to jump straight to Delaware unless you really have some sort of time commitment. Let's take a step back, do your homework, and understand, number one, what are your key criteria, right? And so some of the hot items for consideration would be where your customer is located, because most likely you want to follow where your customer base is. Number two would be talent, right? If you intend to hire employees, which within this industry, it is very heavy. A lot of folks have to be on site. So you need to hire where you have employees. And then some of the other ones, of course, tax considerations, right? Certain states have higher taxes, certain states have lower, as well as a wealth of tax incentive programs, which we'll get into a little bit later on. And then I would say the fourth tier is legislation, is how friendly is each state. So I like to say that when people are coming to the US, it's almost like coming into 50 many different states. Not only will you have the federal legislation governing, but then you will have the state by state legislation that you have to take into consideration. So for example, if you have an employee in California, I would say that is the probably most employer-friendly state out of all of the US. So if we can focus on some of the other states, unless you really know that's top talent. So little considerations like that, right? And I would always advise that you take a look at that holistic picture and understanding, okay, out of those, 4 or 5 criteria that I listed, what is really crucial for you as a company, and then make your decision, right? Moving on. So now you know where you want to register. Usually the next approach is payroll, how do I hire employees, etc. I already mentioned it's like operating 50 different little countries, and each state has its different legislation. So I listed the 3 most common: employer record, professional employer organization, PEO, and local entity is essentially if you set up your local entity, and we call it a standalone payroll. Those are really the 3 options. And I'm going to start with EOR first. So EOR essentially is, I call it a quick and dirty way of entering the market and being able to hire folks. What's nice about it is you will not need to set up your entity, register for payroll purposes in the US before being able to hire this individual. The downside is that employer of record is essentially a third party that you hire to take on the onus of acting as the official employer that is doing that registration for you. So even though you're not doing that registration, the EOR provider will be doing that. And that means that they take care of all of the obligations, all the filing requirements, payroll, salaries, withholding, etc. But the downside is the name on the employment contract will indicate this EOR provider. However, it's only for back office, right? And, compliance requirements. The day-to-day responsibilities and oversight of the employees will continue to be retained with your firm. So I see a lot of my companies that really just identify talent that's really crucial, want to get this employee on board, but they don't have their entity set up right away, will default to EOR, right? Now, the downside of that is it does not protect the company from what we call permanent establishment. So a lot of times when you have an employee, depending on the nature of activities, and we often say revenue generating activities or contract closing. So if they're signing, negotiating, and closing contracts in the US, that will essentially trigger corporate tax liability, which is the definition of permanent establishment in the US. That essentially will say that the company needs to register and be able to remit corporate tax to the US. So that needs to be very clear. As EOR means you don't need to register for anything. So obviously, if there was ever an audit and it's found that the activities of this employee triggers PE, there could be a potential corporate tax exposure to the company. And that's when we move on to that second and third tier PEO or a standalone payroll under your own entity. Under PEO, you will still need to set up an entity. However, you split it in 2. We call it the co-employment strategy. So here, what's nice is you will still need to incorporate and register in each state that you will have an employee in. However, all of the back office will continue to be taken care of by the PEO firm. So they will take care of all of the mandatory HR reporting requirements in each state. They will do the remittances, etc. But it will be essentially a shared employment between both your company and this. Really, same thing. I think PEO is very quick, usually more cost efficient. And another pro with PEO versus operating your own standalone payroll is really in the US benefits is really costly, right? It's almost a mandatory item. I know it's supplementary benefits. There is no mandatory law that indicates you have to offer it. But really in the US, if you want to hire really great talent, it's almost an expectation that you will have some sort of minimal supplemental benefit plan to offer. Now, if you only have around 5 heads or less coming in, you're not going to be able to source your own corporate benefit plan that is, 1, cost efficient, or remotely going to offer the coverage level that your employees expect. So that's what's nice about a PEO firm. If you think about it, the PEOs consolidate hundreds and thousands of employees across multiple companies. So they actually have quite some sway and have quite good, robust benefit plans that can be offered to your employees. So that I generally find that that's one of the big decision factors of whether or not a company wants to do PEO versus operating your own separate payroll, which is this third option here. So under your own entity, a lot of folks are going to say, why would I want to run a PEO if I can essentially just process my payroll in-house, perhaps outsource it for a couple of bucks per payslip? It's for that items I mentioned. I would say this third option, definitely feasible. You can outsource it to a payroll processor. But the complexities of, let's just say you have employees in 10 states, you have to go and ensure that you are in compliance with all of those 10 states, right? Certain folks will have minimum equity and diversity reporting requirements. It's not just payroll. There's different insurance requirements if somebody goes out on leave. So all of those complexities you will have to handle in-house. So I do find, especially with companies coming in overseas, I don't even recommend that people go off and do their separate payroll under their own entity unless they really start reaching, the hundreds of employees and have a dedicated HR manager that will be hired in-house to oversee it, right? Okay, moving on. And I did want to quickly touch base on IP and patents. It's very important from a brand recognition perspective. So a lot of folks always assume you can come in, essentially leverage your overseas IP registrations and go on your merry way and operating and doing business in the U.S. Not the case here. The same spiel you're going to hear me say over and over again is by state. I think it's very important for companies to recognize that while there are international agreements that do offer a level of protection for your host country IP rights, you will still have to go through registrations of your patent or your IP with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. And it is quite a lengthy process. It can range from a couple of months to, I've seen it drag on for years, depending on the logo. Is there, a similar company that's offering the same name? So really the takeaway here is just to ensure that you have a proper licensed lawyer that is looking into these registrations for you and getting that process started right away, right? And then that will trickle down into the contracting that I've mentioned here, is ensuring that your employment contracts as well as your vendor contracts all will reference those IP registrations and trademarks. The big one here. So I like to say probably next to Mexico and Brazil, we have probably one of the more complex tax systems in the world here. So you'll see here, it's multi-tier. So we were going to have a federal, state, and sometimes on a local level, different taxes that will impact the company. And especially when it comes to the industrial and agricultural business, when it comes to equipment, all of that is tangible goods. So it's a no-brainer where sales tax is definitely going to apply. Of course, there's many exemptions that we'll talk into a little bit. But for example, if I was advising a service company or a SaaS company, usually that's on the lower end of concern from a sales tax perspective because they don't actually have a physical presence. So I think most of the customers on the webinar today, this is definitely a hot topic. It will definitely really be relevant for the team here. So in terms of corporate tax, you'll see here that depending on where you choose to register to do business, it can impact anywhere from 10 to 12% of a change, right? So federal right now is set at 21%, which is already quite significantly lower from what it used to be. It was 35%. Then when you go down to the state level, depending on which states you register in, it can be an additional 0 to 11.5%. And you have to think about, for example, if you are registering in multiple states, that is essentially varying percentages. So going back to what we discussed at the very beginning and understanding, choose wisely as to where you choose to incorporate and register or do business and choose to hire, because wherever you normally have a warehouse, have an office location, employees, you will have to register in that state to do business and be remitting state corporate tax on top of your federal tax return. It makes it more complex because if you think about going from having to file one single tax return to having to file, let's just say 11 tax returns, that adds to your compliance requirements and just the complexity of having to allocate your income amongst those different states to calculate those taxes. So all in all, that's what we're in the business of doing, right? Is ensuring that we are advising on the most cost efficient way to register and be reporting taxes in a compliant manner. So that's corporate. I think sales tax is a whole different beast here. There is no federal sales tax rate. The sales legislations is essentially governed by the state, right? So you will have the state sales tax rate, and then some of those states will actually go down to the local level, down to the county or municipal. So for example, in New York, I think there were like 4 different tax rates because they have the state, the city, or the county, and then the city. And all that will add up to your total tax rate. Here it can range from none. For example, in New Hampshire, there is no sales tax, up to 9.55%. And some of the heavy, I think that was actually Pennsylvania. I think particularly with sales tax, another really crucial item is to really do your homework, right? When you trigger corporate tax, I would say corporate tax has a higher nexus threshold, meaning you may not need to register in that state right away if you have sales in that state. But when it comes to sales tax, I find that most companies would trigger that requirement to register more quickly. The reason why is usually nexus is, again, determined by physical presence. Do you have an employee there, physical office, etc.? Or often not, let's just say you don't have any physical presence there. It will be dictated by your customer levels, right? How many sales are you making in that state? What will be the sales tax liability if you were, and is that service or goods that you are selling even taxable? So especially in the agricultural business, which is great. I've seen that many companies do exempt agricultural, which is great. So hopefully this is just a moot point, but in the off case where that state does tax it, definitely, come to the likes of HSP or a tax advisor and just do your due diligence. Number 1, verify, is your operations taxable? Number 2, do you need to register? And number 3, what is your liability? Right. Okay.
Sally, I might just come in there with a question. If you could clarify for us the difference between state and local tax. That was a question that came in the chat.
Absolutely. So the state is on the state level. So the very, very top tier, the 50 states. Now, local is usually down to the city and the county, right? So those are all different governing tax authorities, and they have their own revenue departments that govern that state. So when I put here the 0 to 7% under the state, it's actually going to be in addition to the 0 to 7%. So it's not 7 plus 7, because I think the 7% high in Pennsylvania, the local highest county rate in Pennsylvania was like 2.55%. So I don't want folks to think that the high rate in totality is going to be the 14%. Okay. So if I think about it, top federal, state, county, city, that's essentially our government system here in the U.S. Anything else there? Good. Okay. One of the other topics that do definitely come up with companies overseas is I often find that folks want to send people from Ireland over to the U.S. to essentially be able to set up their initial operations, right? So first and foremost, immigration is a big item. It is becoming more and more complex and more difficult, if anything, to obtain the proper visas with recent political environments, obviously. So what I've listed here, a couple of the more common ones, the E1, E2, and L1. I think the biggest takeaway, again, is doing your homework is first, gather your documentation. You should always ensure that for that individual, have their resumes and CVs ready. A lot of these visas, for example, the L1 will require that the individual would have worked for the company for at least 1 year before you can essentially have them come over to the US on that L1 visa. So those are usually the basic information of CV, what is the job description of the role in the US, and having that immigration attorney review and confirm what is the appropriate visa that is fit for purpose. Then they will give you the list of criteria and then advise on next steps, timelines, etc. I find that it can range anywhere from 2 to 6 months, if not longer, for any one of these visas. There are expedited options here, but it will impact your operational timeline. So I always like to just throw in a slide here to say, it's not just timing of entity setup and setting up your back office, but if there are crucial personnel that have to come over, this definitely will play a heavy hitter into your timelines as well, right? And then another item of consideration will be, what is the end goal for the individual that's coming over here? So if it is just a short stint, what I call a short-term assignment ranging from 1 to 3 years, we would call that, either an expat, and you essentially will run what we call a shadow payroll. I'm saving that probably for a different webinar. Global mobility is a whole separate beast in itself. But that leads into my second point here is that may play a factor into what type of visa you go into, right? If there's a short-term stint, usually the visas that we've advised here will suffice. But if this individual wants to stay here long-term, now we have to start planning with that individual of, okay, do we need to help obtain a green card? Do they want to obtain their permanent residence here? That real long-term planning, and then going into, okay, how do we localize that individual? So converting him from a full-blown expat to actually a full-blown U.S. national that is reporting in payroll Social Security. Okay, very good. And I think the last item we mentioned, it very much ties back to everything we talked about just now in terms of, what state to choose, tax implications. In the U.S., we have lots of very, very good, robust incentive programs that range from tax incentives to workforce incentives, meaning they may offer you a relief on your employer obligations, especially in your industry, as well as I already mentioned relief on the sales and use tax, or even offer grants, right? So a lot of these would be either a relief on your tax rate, so you will get a more preferential tax rate with the federal IRS, down to the state level. I have seen, for example, certain states will offer grants if you come and choose to set up operations. It could be land grants if it's farming, or they will offer you R&D credits depending on what type of equipment or IP you're developing in the states here. So I would be, remiss to not mention that definitely does play a factor into your overall cost budgeting for the U.S. So we've listed a couple of the big markets here that do offer some pretty good, robust, healthy incentives. Again, our job here is to be able to advise based on your industry and the market that you're looking into. Are there any applicable incentives or grants that you can leverage from? Okay. And then from here, I think I'll hand it over to my colleague, Ryder.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sally. First of all, I really want to thank Enterprise Ireland for putting this webinar together. We're very lucky to be in collaboration with such a great organization, and hopefully we can be of help to some of the companies here that are looking to expand internationally and into the U.S. So my name is Ryder. I'm also based in the Boston hub here for HSP. And just to provide a bit more context on HSP Group, so we specialize in global expansion and compliance in over 100 plus countries and can be your trusted partner for inbound to the US. So our goal is to really help companies expand outside where they're headquartered, whether it be organic growth, first time expanding to a new country, help consolidate your back office operations under one partner, or through cross-border M&A. We really try to take a consultancy approach to come up with the best solution for your people and organization. And high level, there's really two sides to what we do. First being supporting your market entry and back office operations in the US in 100 plus countries. Usually that starts with entity setups to all the registrations needed in country, can help open up a bank account, provide registered address, and take care of all the annual filings, running payroll, handling HR, benefits, accounting, tax compliance. But there's also a consultancy side to our business. So that's where, I'd loop in members of the team like Sally, really do a deep dive of what you're looking to achieve overseas, to determine the level of footprint you're looking to establish, and cover some of the entity types and employment models Sally spoke about earlier. We also have an HR team that specializes in employment contracts, handbooks, benefits benchmarking, making sure you're compliant and a competitive employer in the U.S. We have some of the best GDPR experts in the industry to understand where your exposure may be. And overall, we really strive to help you navigate the complexities of doing business in the U.S., help with your overarching strategy, and hold your hand through that process. So I think that covers it from my side. Thanks everyone here today for joining, and Enterprise Ireland for putting this together. On the next slides, our contact information if you have any questions, and I believe we're moving to a Q&A session now. Thanks so much.
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Sally and Ryder. A lot covered there, and a lot more to it would probably just scratch the surface. But if you have follow-up questions for Sally and Ryder, their details are on the screen and they're always happy to chat. And we have got a few great questions in through the chat. So I might just dive into them. There's one here. If you register as an LLC, can you convert to a C Corp later on?
Yes, absolutely. That's actually one of the great benefits of operating in the U.S. is quite common. Of course, I always like to say, do your homework. So before you jump into it, always make sure you have a proper lawyer and tax advisor that has reviewed and taken a look at all of the implications and the tax impacts of doing so. But in short, yes, there's different methods. You can either merge the company or essentially do a statutory consolidation of the companies. So it definitely is a yes. What I see most companies would do is the LLC members will be converted into shareholders of the C corporation, and then the companies are essentially amalgamated together.
Great. And you touched on something there, which is lawyers and accountants, etc., and having good ones in place. And one of the questions that did come in was, what are the benefits of using, for example, accountants, lawyers based in the US versus individuals based in Ireland?
Yeah, spot on. It's really just the lack of local legislation, right? So not only will you need to make sure that when you come to the US, you're often going to find that lawyers are licensed to do business in a particular state or on a federal level. So I think the difficult part is being able to find that lawyer that can essentially operate in all 50 states that actually know the legislation of each state, right? So for example, if we said you're incorporated in New York and you essentially want to convert from an LLC to C Corp, and then you have a lawyer that's licensed in Cali, they will not be able to do that for you, right? Nor will a lawyer from Ireland be able to do that. You need to understand what are the local legislations and the tax implications holistically to be able to implement it without hurting your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And that holistic thinking is something that's very important for the US, because sometimes you have to think about it as 50 separate countries rather than one huge country. And I think one of the questions that's actually come in, it's talking conceptually, but it's a software company who's asking if they have clients in different states and employees dotted across different states, how do you decide where to locate your business?
Yeah, it actually goes back to my earlier discussion, is I would always like to just understand what's important to you as a business, right? And then usually what I find out of those 4 criteria, customers, employees, anticipated warehouse, office locations, and then the tax implications, of course, we can usually find a sweet middle ground. And there's usually like a hub or maybe a top 3 list of states that are really critical, right? So then we whittle it down, and we may have to essentially arrive at your initial state of incorporation, and then you choose to essentially register like a head office somewhere, right? So there is no sort of black and white answer. Essentially, it is almost like a brainstorming session with customers to negotiate what's important to them and then nailing it down, right? And I do see here specifically the question, I think, from Gerard here, right? Like a software company with 2 locations in Nebraska and somewhere in New England. I'm assuming that you mean that you are currently registered in Nebraska and somewhere in New England, let's just call it Massachusetts, right? And if you want to hire a consultant in California, I would always ask first is, what does this individual do? you might not want to bring on this individual immediately as an employee. As I already mentioned, California is one of the most complex from an employer legislation perspective. So first and foremost is, can he be brought on as a contractor? Usually that's really great. There's certain measures that you want to keep in place. Let this individual control his own schedule, shouldn't be promoting, under your company name, etc. But usually you want to test trial that as a contractor first, instead of bringing him on your payroll immediately. If you do find that you do want to hire this individual, tried and tested, which is great, then you will have to register in the state of California. Then I will ask you, what payroll option did you have in place for your Nebraska and New York operations? Is it that standalone payroll? Is it the PEO option? Depending on which one, I would say PEO, no big issue. They will handle everything for you, right? All you would have to do is register in the state of California as an employer. They'll do out the compliance. But if you have your own standalone payroll, then essentially you would have to, I would say, go to the likes of an HSP or an HR expert and really understand what are your employer obligations in California before you extend that offer, so that you understand what you're going to be on the hook for.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of leads into, again, a broader issue that's probably for another webinar, which is the new world of remote working and hiring talent in what is a very competitive landscape. And a lot of employers are choosing to hire remotely because it broadens the talent pool, but with that comes challenges. So for example here, and this is probably our last question, but if an employer was hiring employees remotely from various states, how do they ensure they are compliant with employment law in each state? Have you seen that landscape evolving, or is it a state-by-state basis?
Yeah, I've seen it, especially in the last 3 years. There's been a lot of movement of people where there were hubs of the cities, folks either moving home, etc., creating a lot of headaches for the company. Especially now that we're a couple of years removed from the pandemic, the state legislation is definitely catching up. So you're going to find that there's more audits. Companies are starting to more crack down on movement of people working from different states. Number one, that's a trend we're seeing, not just in the U.S., but across the globe. And then number two is really, I would take another reassessed look at your payroll. Our company as well operates under PEO, and our PEO firm is great. They essentially operate in all 50 states. They register in all 50 states, and we essentially have employees in like 20 different states. They take care of all of the compliance for us, right? So it may be a method of, okay, if you know you're going to expand and you have these employees in so many different states, maybe changing your payroll methodology, paying a little bit more to have that ease of mind. If not, then it would be doing your homework and understanding your obligations in each state, either via a firm like HSP, where you can outsource that, or an in-house HR manager. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I always learn a lot, Sally, when I speak to you. And thank you to yourself and Ryder for the great presentation today. I'm sure there are follow-up questions. So if you'd like to take Sally and Ryder's details, please feel free to follow up, and we'll share details after the call as well. But we are moving on. Thank you very much. And I'll move on to our next slide, please, where we will hear from some Irish companies who have successfully executed strategies into the US at various stages of growth and entry. So first we have WiseTech. Sean Sheehan is founder and CEO of WiseTech. We will be followed by McGraw Tech, which is an Amy, US Sales Director, and finally Darren Fenton from Bevcraft Group, who's co-founder and COO. So I might stop sharing the slides now, and I'll ask Sean to join the call. Hi, Sean.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So as I said, Sean, you're founder and CEO of WiseTech, which is a global leader in secure data destruction and recycling of IT materials. You're currently operating in Ireland, the UK, Asia, and the US. So last I checked, WiseTech operates from bases in Massachusetts, California, Virginia, and Texas. So plenty of experience across the US.
Yes, yeah. We entered the US in about 2011. And basically we followed one of our customers over there. So that was in Boston. And we've been there ever since. We moved to a few different facilities because generally we lease. And we moved to, we opened up in Virginia then. Virginia mainly because we were following the data center. So it's the data center capital of the world, around Reston in Virginia. So that's why we went down that area. We went to Austin again to follow one of our customers. So we opened up there. California, we went over that side, and we went to Sacramento because of costs. A lot of IT headquarters are in California, so we had to have a presence there really. So we looked at it, quite expensive and hard to get people. So we looked at Sacramento, and it made sense from a cost perspective. So that's why we went to Sacramento, and it's probably one of our fastest growing facilities from our point of view. So it's worked out quite well. If I was to look back on different areas and all that, like again, we follow markets, we follow our customers and all that, which is the right thing to do. Labor is probably cheaper down south, but there is a very good program that goes on there. It's called Select USA, which is run by the Irish USA Embassy, and it happens around this time every year. And basically all the states, it goes on in Washington, DC, and basically all the states get together. They all meet, and if you go over there, you can actually meet with every state. They're all vying for your business, and that's where you get your grants and your incentives and all that, and you get them all under one roof. So that's certainly worth looking at for people that want to go in that area. There is a delegation that goes from Ireland that's organized by the embassy. So that's certainly worth looking at. And if like what we did that time, we had leased in Boston, and we went looking for incentives afterwards, and they knew we were coming anyway, so we didn't get anything out of that. But I think they are getting better now. There is more opportunities as part of the taxes that you do pay in the different states. You are entitled to some training, so free training and all that. That we only discovered recently, and we're availing of that. So that's something that we are looking at. We have about 220 people in the US, so it is our biggest growth area, and we see a lot more opportunities in the US for our business. Europe is fairly mature because we've been doing we in Europe for a long time. So like you have GDPR in Europe around data protection. That's just going into the States now, and it's only recently legislation in California has taken place, and the other states will follow suit. So it's a good time for us to be in the US. I think the other thing about the US is that there's no such thing as a small order. If you can get a PO in the US, it's generally quite large. So be ready for that one. The labor side of it is quite expensive. So California is tricky from a labor perspective, particularly around law and all that, and it is expensive. So you need to watch that one. I know North Carolina at the moment have a lot of incentives, a lot of grants going on. So that's definitely an area to look at. We're known as WiseTech Inc. in the US. We're a Delaware company. Based on what Sally was talking about earlier on, and what Sally was saying, that makes a lot of sense. Make sure you do your homework. I think the other area that we spend a lot of time with is actually ourselves, Enterprise Ireland. If we're moving to an area, we'll always contact Enterprise Ireland. We'll get local companies that have set up in that region, and Enterprise Ireland will introduce it to these companies, and generally they're very generous in giving you information about the different tax, different labor laws, their experience, which is very important. And that's certainly an area that you should look at if we're going to different. I think you have about 6 different offices now in the US, which covers a broad landmass, so which is quite good. Okay. Okay.
I suppose the question for you, Sean, is when you started out in the US, you might have had experience in UK, Europe, and you were coming from Ireland. How did you find the differences in kind of consumer habits and the difference in the business landscape? Was that difficult to adjust to? Was there a lot of travel involved? Is there still a lot of travel involved between the two? And how would you compare them?
I know I know the States is good. You know, the Irish connection there is absolutely fantastic, and particularly around the Boston area. Like, I think there's 1 in 5 claim to have Irish backgrounds. So like the Irish thing will always open doors for you, no matter where you are. Now it's up to yourself afterwards to win the business. So like, and it's always great to open doors, but you know, like you had when it comes to the last rounds, you are up against probably an American company, which can be tougher. But it's great to get the doors open. So certainly use the Irish connections over there. Again, for travel wise, the East Coast is always easier. So you're 5 or 6 hours, so you can hop on. You're over there at the end of the day, and all that. You're working. Well, if you go to the West Coast, it just takes that little bit longer. There can be up an 8-hour difference, which naturally enough doesn't help if you're out of Ireland. So you should take that into consideration as well, is the access to people and all that. And otherwise you're working late in the evening trying to connect up with the West Coast. So that is definitely a factor. It's a vast country. It's a massive country. So like, you know, like when you are traveling there, if you can get a direct flights there, it's always helpful. If there's a stop, you're adding an extra 3 hours at least onto your journey. So you need to take that into consideration. But again, you know, it's your markets are important, of course. The labor, tax, as I mentioned earlier on. You know, so they're all valuable things to consider. Like, and do your homework. You know, do the business plan. You know.
Absolutely, and great advice. Really, really great points there. And I think some of the key takings from it are Select USA. I'm delighted you mentioned that event. Because it's almost like a one-stop shop at the beginning when you're doing your research and you're trying to understand the incentives that are there at a more local level. So really well worth considering if, you know, the US is part of a broader strategy or it's a priority market. That's one worth looking at, and we can also share details of that event following this one today. But I think you have a great wealth of experience in the US, seeing as you've experienced it from both sides of the coasts, up, down, and it's great to get that advice. And I think something that is very important to consider is that you did it progressively. So you started in one, you experienced it, you followed the opportunity, and then from there you had your landing point and you could spread across. So I think that was really impactful as well.
Oh, absolutely. We've made plenty of mistakes as we go along as well. I think like if you're in a growth, you need to be careful that we try to manage a lot of it from Ireland. And we kind of let the management side over there slip a bit, but like that works for a while. But if you're growing and you have a lot of people in the US, because you have different laws in different states, as we learned earlier on, you know, you're trying to manage different people, you have different tax regimes and all that kind of stuff. So it's important that you have the right people in the US and you hire the right people, or you use the right agencies. So we try to do a lot of that for Ireland, and it doesn't work. You'll find out that the hard way sometimes, you know. So I spent the last 2 months in the US just hiring some C-suite people over there to run the business over there, because we're getting too big to do it from here. It doesn't make sense. So you learn that the hard way too. Sometimes it just doesn't work. You know, you need to have the right people over and the right experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that putting boots on the ground is very important in the US. Well, thanks so much. We're at time already. Some really fantastic advice and a pleasure chatting to you. I might ask you to just hang on till the end of the call. We might take a few questions at the end. I can see a few coming through for the panel. But yeah, congratulations, Sean, on all of the successes so far.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Amy, I might ask you to pop up next. Amy is the US Sales Director at Magrotech and is based in Iowa. Magrotech technology increases the effectiveness of industrial spraying by controlling the size of the spray, leading to significant waste savings related to pesticide spreading. So really innovative company and doing really well in the US. Amy has been instrumental at building out Magrotech's partnership network since joining back in January. I think the development has been amazing already. So Amy, you're very welcome to the call.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having us.
No problem. So we might dive in straight away to partners, Amy, because finding the right partner can be very challenging, especially in a country as large as the US, with many different kind of cultural differences, and also if you're starting out with a limited network, it can be very difficult. So can you enlighten us to kind of some of Macrotech's partnership strategy and how you're finding the right partners in the US?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the things that's most important for us in the US is finding the right partner and somebody that can represent our brand. Macrotech being an Irish-based company, we don't have the brand recognition that companies like a John Deere or Case International, which are large agriculture companies in the US, we don't have that brand recognition. So finding a partner to not only help us to build our brand recognition, but also to find the right individuals to represent our products and bring them into the market, as well as a partner that was really going to help us logistically. Our product is not a software, it is a hardware solution. So not only do we need to think of bringing, finding the right sales people and the representation in the US, but also how are we going to distribute? And so one of the benefits with EI has been a lot of connections that they've helped us make in the early days when we were starting to come into to build into the United States. We started in the US in 2019. And our first partner that we brought to the table, that EI kind of helped us culminate and bring to the table, was an organization that's large in the agriculture space, and they represent many different types of agriculture products. And they have distribution throughout the entire United States, Canada. Also, they have a global reach. So finding that partner that can establish not only our brand in the US, but also help us drive our story and really get their salespeople on board with bringing a new product into the market.
Absolutely. And you touched there on it sounds like that was quite a large dealer, so working with a lot of different brands, and maybe as well, coming as an Irish company, it can be difficult to stand out when you're competing with a lot of different brands and competing for attention. Do you have any advice on how you can stay top of mind and how you can really solidify that relationship with your partner?
Yeah, really making sure that you're working with a partner that has the same goals as your company. Macrotech is very much about feeding the world. And our solution is one piece of the puzzle that can help companies be more sustainable, growers raise more crops so that, we can continue to feed the growing population. And finding the partner that is interested in representing that way of life is important. Somebody that's been in the industry for quite a while, the agriculture space is important. And then just really making sure that we have a strong partnership with them in the way of working together and having, continued dialogue and discussions about their goals as an organization and how those goals compare to our goals, and making sure we're aligned on our go-to-market strategies. So it's very much a two-step process with both companies working together. But what that allowed us to do when partnering with our first large dealer partnership in the US was really ensuring that they had a presence in many different states in the US. And so we didn't have to bring a team of 10 to 15 individuals on board. We really just had to manage that relationship work that relationship. And that's what really was our stepping stone into the US. And then since then, we've expanded into many different types of partnerships and different avenues of to market.
Absolutely. And I guess looking at these avenues and partnership networks and dealer networks, what are the benefits of working with dealers in this case, rather than setting up your own physical location in the market?
Yeah, so some of the benefits are, again, our brand is represented under their known brand. So them having the brand recognition and awareness, it's easier for them to have a conversation on a brand new technology. They're trusted advisors in the industry with the dealer network that we have. Again, the sales representation has been important, that they have a large footprint throughout the US, a large sales staff. And so they're able to cover a lot of ground really quick versus us scaling up and bringing a large number of salespeople on board under Macrotech and having to manage, a large number of employees in the US. And then the logistics. So most of our partnerships, they handle all of the distribution and installation of our products. So we only have to worry about sending our product to 1 or 2 locations in the US versus each individual sale having distribution requirements and needs. So that's been that's a really big piece of our success, is that we did not have to, out of the gate, we did not have to establish a warehouse. We did not have to bring in logistical support. We were able to rely on that dealer network for that purpose.
Absolutely. So you rely on the dealers, but also you need good trust. You need to trust them as the advisor. They are essentially the face of your brand. So this is a testament to why it's important to choose the right dealers who have the buy-in, I suppose. And it sounds like you're well on your way to doing that. I think over 10 or multiple dealers in the US across 40 locations, I believe. So congratulations on that. I'm sure we will be seeing lots more of Macrotech over the coming years.
Yes, for sure. We're looking to eventually, in the next 3 to 5 years, 70% of Macrotech's revenue will come from the US based operations. So there's a lot of expansion to continue to happen, but we've got a really good footprint. And some things that Enterprise Ireland has really been helpful with is not only those connections, but also when I talk about brand recognition, we've been allowed, we've received several grants and support from EI on trade show events and sales and marketing funds. And so that's been really beneficial to take on some additional opportunities to get our brand out into the marketplace and partner with EI in that way. So that's been another area that's been very beneficial from our relationship with Enterprise Ireland.
Absolutely, because that was actually a query that came in through the chat on trade shows. How valuable is the investment, because the cost of trade shows has gone up. Sometimes it seems exponentially, and Enterprise Ireland can support it in certain ways with market discovery stages. So if there are large scale events that a client company is considering, certainly speak to your development advisor to see if there are supports that we can help with there. But unfortunately, that's all we have time for. We might come back to trade shows if we have a moment at the end, Amy, so I might just ask you to stay on the line. But thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I appreciate it.
Of course. So next is Darren Fenton. Darren, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Si. Sorry, just a moment there with the mute button. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me and the previous panelists. It's been a really interesting webinar so far, so thank you for that. I suppose, will I kick off, just give a brief helicopter view of what we do as a business and how we've ended up in the US?
Yeah,
great.
Please do, Darren.
Sure. So we started the business, myself, Darren Fenton, I'm now COO of the business, and my co-founder, Kieran Gorman. We started the business in Mullingar, County Westmeath, back in 2016. So we really set about setting up what we call now a craft can business. A craft can business in our own dictionary is anything that involves getting a craft beverage or a small scale or subscale beverage into a can. So our flagship service within that would be mobile canning. This is a mobile-based contract canning service where we take equipment, know-how, stock, QA procedures to a client site and package on their site. So opposed to the large breweries or the large co-packers, which would have everything self-contained, we do it from site to site. I suppose tangential to that, we have a can distribution business where we cure and source large quantities of cans from can making plants and distribute those at smaller quantities. And more recently, I suppose we have a can decoration business. This is where we procure unbranded cans and we distribute them out pre-decorated to the client as they need them. So rather than taking up large swaths of capital and space, they can have branded cans as they need them by the pallet. So our own journey up to now, we started in Ireland, as I said. We realized pretty quickly that Ireland is a small market for what we do, a very, very important market and still one that's very close to our heart and very important in the mix. We realized if we wanted to grow and expand and create more opportunity, we would have to, I suppose, look outside of our own borders. So we set up in the UK in 2018. That was a very simple distribution model. We quite simply took in large quantities of cans, distributed them out. We, I suppose, built on that to layer in the mobile canning business that I referenced. And in 2022, last year, we completed our first M&A. So we acquired the mobile canning business of what would have been our largest competitor in the UK. And that really gave the UK market a big springboard in terms of growth. And we set up in the Netherlands around the same time. That's a distribution mobile canning hub. It's based in Breda. In 2022, also last year in December, we completed a share-for-share merger with a company called Ryder and Tappery. That's a company very similar to our own and friends of ours, I suppose, since the very beginning, who are based in Norway, and they've come into the group now as shareholders and directors. So I suppose, again, trying to build up the administrative back end and try to build up a scalable organization. And in June of this year, in fact, just last week, we completed our entry into the US market. So this was obviously quite a big step, and the theme of today's conversation, I suppose. We did that in a very similar way to how we established in the UK. So we acquired a mobile canning contractor based in New Jersey, Kenilworth, New Jersey. And that business was called Tripod Canning. And we have officially taken over the reins, so to speak, of that business as of last week. So we're actively trading as Bevcraft USA LLC. And look, so far so good. Lots of things resonated, particularly in what Sally was saying earlier on, in terms of, I suppose, having the right advisors, having the right people to lean on. None of us within the group so far are tax experts or IP experts in terms of US law. So that was a very important piece for us. And Enterprise Ireland have been really helpful in that front and been able to advise us and point us in the direction of advisors of great depth of knowledge. In terms of our route to market into the US, I suppose we've been looking at the US market for quite a while. It's essentially the home of the craft beverage or craft beer. Maybe people who are familiar with Bud Light and some of these bigger brands might not realize, but there are literally 10,000 breweries in the US. So we spent many, many years traveling back and forth, trying to learn the market, trying to figure out what the opportunity might be, and if we could, I suppose, bring our business model to US shores. Really the important thing for us when choosing a market is the geography and the demographics. So really that how many people are in an area and what's their capacity or their, I suppose, what's their ability to consume. So we will always look at where the consumer base is. Is that a consumer base that has a strong track record of a craft beverage industry? And the eastern seaboard of the US, particularly the Northeast, and New York, New Jersey, Connecticut is a very, very strong market in that sense. To find our way into the market, I suppose, as I say, we spent quite a lot of time traveling up and down. One piece of advice I would give is get to know the back roads of the place. And that will give you a great insight in terms of what the consumer base is like. And anecdotally, if you were to travel from, say, Trenton, New Jersey to Princeton, New Jersey, and have a meal in each, you will learn quite a lot about the market. And it's an insightful, I suppose, experience. In terms of setting up the business in the US, we had to make a choice, we had to make a decision early on, I suppose. And that was whether we wanted to build organically and to set up from scratch, or to buy a business, an incumbent business, and try to take that on and grow it. We, I suppose, figured out pretty quickly that the build option was probably a safer option to get going in the US. We were very lucky in terms of we found a really suitable partner in Tripod Canning. The business itself was running quite well. I suppose what we were able to bring to the table was it's an owner-operated business. It didn't have much in terms of an administrative back end. So we were able to bring some of our shared services and administrative depth from Ireland. And I suppose the plan is to grow it from there. So that's hopefully going to work quite well for us. Another point, I suppose, a decision we made early on was to hire a local commercial director. So we've hired a US citizen, his name is Connor Bowden. He's going to act as our commercial director in the US business. In the absence of that, I think I'd be flying back and forth to the US on a weekly basis. Not really a sustainable option. It's something, to be quite honest, that scared me when we were looking at the build option or the organic option. So that's something I think that we've hopefully a decision that we've made that will stand to us. I suppose a little bit from what Sally mentioned earlier, we chose to go down the Delaware LLC option. So we're incorporated in Delaware as an LLC. Again, that does give us quite a bit of flexibility. We did lean quite a bit on our advisors and partners when making that decision. And our attorney in particular would have strongly advised us to go down that route. I suppose in terms of Enterprise Ireland, EI have been there from the start. There's lots of supports available when setting up in any new market, and we found that across all of our business entities. The Market Discovery Fund would be one that's very helpful. Grad Start, it's something that's allowed us to build up the shared services and administrative side in Ireland, which does service the US business. And look, lots of intangible supports as well. You know yourself, Sive, that we've been in touch now for quite a few months as we were sort of setting up our game plan to set up in the US, and the referrals, the advisors, I suppose, PR and the credibility that EI give has been really helpful.
Great. Thank you very much, Darren. It has been a pleasure working with you on your market entry strategy over the last few months, and congratulations on the full announcement this week. It's not every day an Irish company acquires a US-based company, so really, really worth celebrating. And thank you for that really insightful advice. It's obviously very fresh. You've just gone through the process of incorporating, of hiring, of the acquisition. So really, really insightful. Unfortunately, we don't have any time for too many questions, but something you did touch on there was the Market Discovery Fund, which is a grant available for client companies who are looking at new markets, which can be used for things like hiring consultants, for research, for trade shows, which is something that Amy would have touched on. So something worth considering if you are seriously considering the US as a new market. But unfortunately, we have to move on. Thank you so much to Darren, to Amy, and to Sean for your time today. And we really appreciate it. And it's great to have that peer-to-peer engagement piece. So moving on, I am going to hand back to my colleague, Rory Brannock, who's going to give an overview of the overseas support and how we can help you as you enter or scale in the US market.
Thanks a million, Sive. Hello there, everyone. Just to introduce myself, my name is Rory Brannock, and as Sive mentioned there, I'm part of the wider kind of industrial team here in the US, also based out of our Austin office. And as you can see there on the right-hand side, our footprint is spread across 6 offices here in the US that cover 6 respective different regions. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview on the supports we offer here from an overseas perspective, especially around entering and scaling in the US market. As I'm sure you're all aware, entering this market is not a quick and easy process, but our supports are here to kind of help plan efficiently and to execute that move essentially. And now in terms of planning, our market research centre in Dublin is a great service. Our team over there will be able to provide reports that would certainly cost in the thousands of dollars otherwise. And those reports are kind of on key events, market intelligence, competitors in the sector, ongoing trends, and much more. But I'd highly advise kind of getting with your development advisor to kind of book a session to really kind of grow your kind of research base and learn more about the landscape of your kind of particular sector or subsector in the US. We also have a valuable network of service providers across all regions, from accountants to immigration lawyers, supply chain consultants, recruitment firms, the list goes on. But these are the introductions that we can make on your behalf, so that you're prepped with those kind of fundamentals to setting up your operations over here. And most importantly, when a company might be ready to commit to entering the US market through their own respective strategy, perhaps be it an office opening, an acquisition similar to what Darren had been talking about there, or even a large partnership, we can really help promote that kind of announcement with our PR supports on our end. And many of these announcements can coincide with a ministerial trade mission, which of course adds to the kind of power of that message. But following entering the kind of US market, and as kind of has been discussed there by the guys, our business development supports are there to kind of really help assist with your growth and your scaling in this market. And we often collaborate with you guys on your pitching decks, your target lists, run some strategic kind of outreach campaigns that kind of provide the most traction, which is of course kind of a fantastic approach to developing opportunities in markets. And it is quite interesting that a lot of the time what you might be familiar with, or what might be a perfect outreach campaign in Ireland or Europe, may certainly kind of have to be tweaked appropriately to kind of engage with the US's culture and I guess their customer base over here. But yeah, just touching again, occasionally we also do attend trade shows and run networking events and initiatives to leverage both our own kind of local executive network and our buyer networks, and of course your own prospects as companies. And that's kind of with the opportunity for you to hold meetings and network in person, with hopefully resulting in some valuable outcomes for yourselves. And just lastly, if you are thinking of planning an in-market visit over here to the US for either research purposes or opportunity purposes, our market advisors across all our offices are there to help you. And we can plan meeting itineraries on your behalf, hold internal meetings with ourselves in our own offices, or even perhaps some simple recommendations in those regions for yourselves. But I'm just going to hand you back to Sive now, who'll discuss kind of some of these supports in practice over the past few months.
Thanks, Rory. Great. So we are conscious that some of the audience on the call today may not necessarily have engaged with our overseas team before, and you may be coming from a broad range of industrial or agribusiness related companies. So this is just a quick introduction to our industrial team in the US. Myself, Phil, Rory and Jessica very much work as one team, but we cover across the US and across various industries, with specializations in various industries as well. So our contact details are there on the screen, and we're very happy to answer any questions you may have following the call. But I also just wanted to spotlight some of the achievements of the client companies that were on the call today. I had a feeling they would be modest. So we have some photos here of Bevcraft announcing their commercial director to the US with Minister Simon Coveney in New York in May. This was a fantastic event and very, very well received by Minister Coveney. He was very impressed. Also, McGrowtech participated in an inward buyer visit that we organised to Ireland last August, where they met with international buyers from the US and formed some really great partnerships and new relationships from that. And finally, Sean Sheehan from WiseTech actually met with the Governor of Massachusetts, Maura Healey, in Dublin this week during a roundtable discussion to discuss Irish innovation in Massachusetts. So some really amazing achievements here from the individuals and the companies on the call. And then moving on swiftly, because we're coming up to time, Rory is going to tell you about an upcoming event that we have in Dublin in November.
Yes, just kind of quickly before we close on our end, I'd like to kind of quickly share an upcoming event that Enterprise Ireland will be hosting in Dublin this November. This will be kind of based on the opportunities of setting up service centers and supply chain solutions in Latin America. And it will be an invite-only knowledge forum. So if you're interested in learning more, please reach out to Sarah Hill here in our Austin office. I think her details are there on screen. And you can express interest at this link that I'll just pop in the chat now here as well. So yeah, that's it from my end.
Great. Thanks, Rory. And now to close, I am delighted to now welcome Tom Kelly, Divisional Manager of Life Sciences and Industrial Enterprise Ireland, to close out today's event. Tom is heavily involved with Enterprise Ireland's Life Sciences, Industrial and Manufacturing portfolio, and has been a driving force for innovation within the agency. Tom has held a number of senior positions with Enterprise Ireland, including the Technology Development Division, where he had responsibility for a wide range of technical support, consultancy and R&D services to industry, assisting firms to adopt best manufacturing practices and to foster innovation at every level through product and process R&D. So Tom, delighted to have you on the call. I would love if you could share your thoughts today and close out the event.
Well, thanks, Saeed. And indeed, like I was going to say, you might have added, I've been here a long time too, as you might guess. So it has been a very interesting journey for me. But I'm very conscious, first of all, of the importance of this event. And I do hope that everybody attending it, got a lot out of it. I certainly did. It's amazing just how much you learn, from every type of encounter, particularly learn from people who are active in the markets, because really, that's really the most important part of business, that you're actually out there in the marketplace and you're actually achieving sales and building those partnerships and alliances that we were talking about. I think I should begin, though, by recognising the presence of Ireland's ambassador to the United States, and Geraldine Byrne-Nason, and the way she spoke so positively about the portfolio of successful Irish companies winning business and doing great things in the United States and right across North America. And I'm particularly kind of taken by the numbers, I suppose, that we use to illustrate just how important the presence of those companies are, first of all, in the scale of success that we're achieving, and year on year, the growth that we've achieved in exports. And I think we were topping out is in excess of 5 billion or more, and that's been growing. But more important than that, I think it's the presence of the companies, the fact that there's 100,000 plus people in the United States employed in Irish companies, in 900 Irish companies that have presence there. I think that shows really more than just that we're there to sell, that we're there to build those partnerships. And I think it's on that basis that we can look forward to an even brighter future, and that Irish companies will continue to succeed in the United States and indeed elsewhere in the world. That, I think, is a very important part of the outlook that we have to have. I'm conscious, though, that when I'm closing out this event, that it's easy for me to do it, but actually all the hard work I know goes in, and it's my colleagues, and it's you, Saeed, and Rory, and Philip, and your other colleagues that actually make this event happen. And I do want to acknowledge all of the hard work that you've done, and to thank you for it. So well done to you. And it has been a really interesting event for me. And I learned a lot. I learned listening from Sally and Ryder Lessing, because they're coming with a level of expertise. And I think getting an insight into issues like taxation, like hiring of employees, establishing a presence, and just the differences that exists, in the different kind of types of company setups. I think that's really very important. And one important thing that sometimes maybe we maybe neglect, on occasion at least, is to emphasize the importance, that there may be local incentives that Irish companies, when they are established in a different market, can access and should access. So I think that to me was an important message. And then, of course, and the great story is that we have already a track record of some really wonderful, successful Irish companies that have, become really involved and are winning business and have established such a significant presence in North America. And I think, some of those companies we were hearing today, and I think everybody on the call, I think, would, and particularly people contemplating entering into the United States, I think will have learned a lot from their contributions. And I suppose kind of the things that was resonating with me was critically important, I suppose, thing for Enterprise Ireland is achieving scale. We're interested in starting companies, but what we really are interested in is companies achieving scale, because that's going to be the best determinant of success and particularly the prosperity that can be created back here in Ireland. So we were listening to Amy and the way she went about, or the way MagTech have gone about identifying the right type of partner. And I listened carefully to the importance of that large partner that that could actually give them the distribution across a large market. And I think that, to me, I think was an important insight. And in terms of, I suppose, innovation is another important theme that accompanies achieving scale. And again, that innovative mindset, that idea of, I suppose, kind of thinking in terms of branding kind of a mobile-based cannery type service, and how you build out from that. That I was struck by that, and just what a wonderful idea it was. And of course, wonderful idea, but an innovative idea is really innovative when you can really kind of make it work in the marketplace. And thankfully, I think that's what we're seeing with Bevcraft. So well done to Darren Finton and his colleagues. And I think in Sean's case, in Sean Sheehan's case, that customer focus, that relentless, unrelenting focus on customers, I think came across to me. And of course, the other message was hiring, and this was repeated by a number of speakers, the importance of hiring the right people in the marketplace, and people, I think, particularly with local knowledge, who can understand the complexity of the market. And all we have to do is look back here in Ireland and to understand the complexity of our own markets. Why would it be any different elsewhere? So getting the right people into your company, I think, is a really important message. And then, of course, the other message is what accompanies that is the importance one needs to attach to the advisors and partners that you form. That too is really important, because you are going somewhat into the unknown. Enterprise Ireland is certainly there to help, but so too are these advisors and partners. And I know we, through you, Saif and Rory, you can make those links. And indeed, maybe that's really a note to finish on. The importance of working with Enterprise Ireland, for the companies to work with their own development advisors back here, but also knowing that we have, in the United States, we have 6 offices, and that's part of a network of, 40 offices globally. So with those 6 offices in the United States, some that are particularly well concentrated in the area of industrial type companies, I think it's really important to make those contacts. And of course, Saif and Rory, your details you've already put up there, and I would encourage companies to make those contacts with the DA, the development advisors back home, but also with our market advisors overseas. So I hope that everybody found this a really worthwhile afternoon. I certainly did, and I wish everybody great success in their journey to America. Thank you very much. Thanks, Saif.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thanks to everybody who joined the call today. Hopefully you did learn something, and we'll keep you in the loop for upcoming episodes of this masterclass in the future. Gurmila Mahagui.
Thanks, Amelia. All the best.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, guys.